Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for our third official Gaming V2 podcast, Podcast V2. With us today is, of course, your hosts, Scott and Karl from Gaming V2, and special guests, Andre and Blackjack.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be talking about the industry in general, AAA games, game sales, and big key players and different things that have been going on in the last little while. There's been a lot of interesting things, and I guess you know what, we're going to go ahead and start with the fact that Cliffy B has been on record actually bashing the Gears of War franchise, his baby, the thing that he helped create, massive multi-million selling franchise, has spawned into four games, a fifth one on its way, many different graphic novels and action figures and you name it. And now, since he's left the company, I think just over a year ago, here he is bashing his own company, the thing that made him who he was, the poster boy of the gaming industry that he is today, is largely, if not completely, a result of the success of Gears of War. And so here we are, and I'm going to go ahead and ask Scott, what do you think of someone of his stature doing something like that, talking negatively about his own work that he now no longer has ties to?
Well, I disagree with you on I guess the perception of how it's interpreted, and that he's bashing it. Like, so the way I read it is that he wasn't. It's not how he planned for it to turn out. It's not that he hated it. It's just that not what he had originally envisioned for Gears of War to be. So I think the quote was he wanted to be band of brothers against monsters per se, and then once the publishers and the marketing got involved, they all of a sudden had these huge beefed up guys who were like the manliest of men taking on the Locust, and ultimately not what he wanted. Now, granted, is he? Now I'm a diehard Gears fan, and having him come back years later and say that what he has released now is not what he wanted, yeah, it's a little heartbreaking. I gotta say, it's a little disappointing to hear that what we've come to know and love based on his creation isn't exactly what he wanted for us. So yeah, it's a little disappointing. And do I wish that it was his vision? Yes, obviously, but it is what it is.
It almost
Well,
it almost feels like a betrayal if I can jump in there because I'm a huge Gears fan and although like I read the article and I you know when he says band of brothers with monsters you instantly got this vision of the big really successful TV show, and it was that was just one of the best things TV ever did. Great directed, great cast and everything. And then you look at Gears and like I think he was really getting upset that yeah, the characters like Scott said were these big meaty like the best of soldiers. They're almost like they're all roided up, but that was always in the concept art that you've seen if you've done any of the behind the scene things, and that was one of the things that actually set Gears apart. Is that yeah, the guys kind of did look a little odd that they were really big, but if anybody played the game, they kind of explained that, and that the cog soldiers were you know they were the last hope of the planet. They were always well fed, and they had to protect the people. And you saw average citizens, and they weren't as big. So when he says that it wasn't what he wanted it to be, and he kind of blames the overall aesthetic of the game, I'm like, well, that was one of the things that really I think drew myself to the game. And I got to say that I disagree with his statement of it not turning out to be a deeper story about soldiers that are basically friends and family, because Karl mentioned all the graphic novels and novels that it spawned, and I for one read all five of them, and there's a lot of story and character behind these guys, and I think it'd be challenging for any video game to be able to put across that depth of character as a show like Band of Brothers. So maybe his vision was, his ultimate initial vision of it was, I don't want to say flawed, but maybe the expectation was too high. He's making a video game. He's not making a movie. And not even a movie. He's not making a television series. Like, how long was Band of Brothers? Like 13 episodes. Each one was over an hour. So I think it's kind of tough to really get down on yourself for that.
and that's true. And you mentioned the concept art, and he had every, or at least what we thought of him in his role, he had every option and the power to influence that. So when he was seeing this concept art, whoever got their hands on it saying make them bigger, make them stronger, he had the ability to, I'm not going to say fight back, but he could have put in his own 2 cents.
Well,
Now,
exactly. we're under the impression that he was the creative lead on this. So
Yeah, they
unless
told us
he's
he was.
yeah, unless he really had no spine and said like, and I don't know, I find it hard to believe that after the fact you can say, yeah, no, this isn't what I wanted the game to look like or play, especially after coming off of Unreal and looking like what Unreal Tournament was and whatnot. It's just like I thought it was a natural progression. It didn't look off to me. So
Well,
Now, in general, if you were to say that if something didn't meet the concept artwork, someone like this would have the say to do something. Him and the higher ups within Epic Games or any of the creative designers should have had the ability to to step in. Ask the concept artists to come up with several different options. Let them pick. Let them vote. I don't think that some suit out there was the one who said you have to make them look all like Macho Man Randy Savage. I'm not too
But
sure.
what
I
if it
mean,
was though?
do you think that they had that kind of control over?
Well, ultimately the publisher has to approve everything, right? So we don't know for sure. I'm not saying that, but it's possible. I mean, I'm not defending Cliff B. I mean, he's the video game version of a bro.
And so are his
But
characters, right?
that's why it's so funny to hear him say how much he didn't like it.
Yeah,
but
he was all for it. I know he was a poster boy for
Yeah.
it, and he obviously had to smile. He's not allowed while he's being paid to go around and say negative things, or he would have lost his job quicker than anything. But at the same time, it really seemed like a passion of his. It didn't just seem like, hey, look, I'm being paid to talk smart about this, talk well about it. He acted like he genuinely was in love with the creation he had a
I
hand
think
in.
we see now that Cliffy B has gone into business for himself. And he said that he doesn't want that game and that series to be his legacy because he's moved on to do something else now. And he doesn't want to be shoehorned into that image of being a bro, right? The
well,
next thing he makes, he wants people to take it more seriously on an artistic level. And I
that's
don't think
cool.
it's right, but
I think that's cool, but like I think we've all mentioned it. Is that Gears of War was highly successful, and it's one thing to say, I don't want to be shoehorned into Gears of War being all I create. So he stepped out on his own, but he's on record. His new company is making a shooter game. He says it's in his blood, right? So it's like, well, you're making a shooter. Well, that's great, but I'm all for people stepping out onto their own. But why are you, in a way, um, down talking what was a successful and a really popular game, and by all means not definitely not bad. Like it's one thing to not be proud of something because it was garbage. But he could if he had came out and said, "You know what? Gears was good. We made it the best as we can, but I want my legacy to be bigger and brighter. So I'm gonna pull out all the stops for this." But it's oh, I didn't want Gears because I didn't like Gears now 2 years later because it wasn't what I envisioned it. Sounds like he's whining, and like I said, it almost feels like a betrayal because I enjoyed the game, like a really big fan. I don't think I was ever a fan, like had any stakes in him at all, but to me it just sounds like, yeah, you don't work for them anymore, and let's like, oh, behind their back you're saying, oh man, I know he didn't say it, but it almost sounds like I was disappointed that I made Gears. That's kind of how I interpret it. So maybe for me it's a little bit too,
Now, do you
I don't know.
think that maybe that had something to do with why he left Epic Games, or do you think he left just because he legitimately wanted to move on?
I think he wanted to move on.
Well, based on what his articles and stuff, like without explicitly stating it, to me it sounded like yeah, Gears of War didn't turn what he wanted to be, but it sounds like when you work for a big company like that, you have to appease the board, you have to appeal to market research, you have to conform your idea to what's going to sell or what the investors are comfortable investing in. And so ultimately, it sounds like that got the best of him, and he didn't like it anymore, so he left. And now he's making his own business. He's making his own development house, and now he can do what he wants now that he has the money to do it.
Which is true. Which is true. And now Microsoft has purchased the rights to the Gears of War franchise. Now it's
That's a
their
no-brainer.
product. That's a no-brainer for Microsoft. I mean, it was a flagship franchise of theirs that they didn't own 100%. Now they do, and that made perfect sense. And Epic Games now has gotten rid of really their number one franchise. I mean, sure, Unreal Tournament's always there, but when was the last time we saw anything from that? And now
Long time ago.
a long time ago. So we have Cliffy B leaving Epic Games shortly before the key flagship franchise of theirs gets moved over to officially 100% Microsoft. And I find the whole thing, I don't know, I think there's more to this story than what the public really knows. I just find it strange how everything worked out. Now, on that notion, so Microsoft now has Gears of War as their own franchise, and sure enough, who do they bring back? Rod Ferguson.
Gears Viking.
Gears Viking. I mean, that's everyone knows him as Gears Viking. So that's how much Gears is in his blood. And here he is. He's back after he had left to go to Irrational Games and left Epic shortly after Cliffy B had left Epic. So it's this whole weird series of events where Cliffy B leaves Epic and then Rod leaves Epic and then Epic gets rid of Gears and then Rod goes back over to Gears. And I just find it. What do you think that means for the Gears of War franchise now that they got Gears Viking back, but they do not have Cliffy B there? Where do you see the franchise going, Scott?
Well, personally, the Gears of War impact from Cliffy was he was the creation lead. He created the universe, he created the characters, he created the monsters. That was his input, and that's been established. And Rod was there as executive producer. He was the one who made it happen over the long run. So I think that the fact that Clippy isn't there, it's not the best situation, but it's not going to kill the franchise. Having Rod will greatly impact the franchise for the better. And I think everyone was disappointed with how Judgment turned out, and compared to the first three, wasn't nearly as good. But I think that whatever they call it, number 4 or 5, will be a much better game now that Rod's back on the project.
This is true. Now, do you think that they're going to do some kind of a prequel or some kind of post Gears 3 game? I mean, Gears 3 almost, I'm not going to say it ended, killed the franchise, but it really, it seems like they almost did in a way.
You're right, and it seemed it was a good finale, and then
Great
when they brought
finale.
out Judgment, they said it was going to be a prequel, and they pretty much said at the start that they're done with Marcus Phoenix. They do not want to have another game with him, which is sad because he is the poster boy of the franchise. And so I don't know where they're going to go with this, what characters they're going to focus on, and how they're going to keep going with the storyline.
The only thing I can think of is the Pendulum Wars, which they mentioned lots. Once
true.
again, that would be a prequel, but we're talking it would be dealing with Marcus's dad, stuff like that. A lot of the stuff we'd heard about, but we didn't get the full scoop on, and now maybe we can see it and play it. I'm not too sure. Andre, what would you want to see in the next Gears of War game? What would you want it to be focused on?
Well, I think with the Gears universe, it is a very large universe. It's got this great sense of history, and as I said earlier, I've read all the novels. There's been 5 novels, all by Karen Travis, a wonderful author, and the way the books worked was that they took the current Gears video game timeline and they inserted background into the characters. So in the first Gears of War game, one of the first cutscenes, they mention Aspo Fields, and that's the title of the first book. And the book actually fleshed out what happened there. You find out how Dom and Marcus meet, and that kind of jumping back and forth thread carries all throughout the novels. And yeah, I think between the novels and the game, they have wrapped up Marcus Phoenix's story. So I don't know if they can really go forward with the franchise, doing something, past Phoenix. But what I would love to see for the Gears of War is kind of a Fallout 3 style of game where it's set right before, right after Emergence Day or around that time, and you're playing either a stranded or somebody who's just living off the land, and you're got the RPG elements, you're trying to scrounge for gear, you're trying to cut out a life in this harsh world because after E-Day, the government basically, as we all know, hammers of dawn the whole planet. So it'd be kind of cool to see how did these guys actually survive. And I think it'd be really neat if it had that Fallout mechanic of you trying to find weapons, repair them, build them up and stuff. And we really saw kind of that city of the kind of the survivors and how the survivors didn't like the cogs. And I think that'd be kind of a really cool way to kind of have it more of like adventure game / RPG as opposed to just first or third person shooter.
Yeah, I think actually that sounds like I think you should be hired. That sounds pretty cool. I'd play that. um, so we had talked about how all these big names, Cliffy B and Rod, leaving the companies that they left, and Rod being the one who left Epic, and then he went to Irrational. He left Irrational Games, and moved over to Microsoft to work on Gears. Now he left Irrational, and what, a week, not even, maybe 2 weeks, we find out Irrational is closing doors. Now, for those of you who don't know, Irrational Games is responsible for BioShock Infinite. They're the ones who made a game that sold multi-million copies across multiple platforms, won many awards, some of which being Game of the Year from numerous websites, reputable websites. It was a massive game that was critically acclaimed, and I played it and I loved it. And even if you didn't like the story, you couldn't deny that the gameplay itself, it was tight, it was fun, it was well scripted, and you're looking at all that, and yet the company's closing the doors. How does that happen? Blackjack, what do you think? How does a company who releases a product like that close its doors? What's going on?
Well, first of all, they didn't actually shut the whole studio. There's like 20 guys left or something. They laid
Which is
off like
almost
90 of the employees.
that's
Yeah, but that's like running on a skeleton crew right now,
right.
right?
Well,
That sounds
it's because
like they're leaving a couple guys there for patching purposes, bug fixes.
right. Well, Ken Levine himself said he wants to do smaller, more narrative-focused games. So you assume that's what those guys are doing. But to answer your first question, the reason it happened is because the game took 2 years too long, 2 years over budget,
Yep.
and it just didn't make back. It didn't actually sell as well as you might think it did. It only sold across all three platforms just over 3.5 million, I think.
That's it.
Wait,
So yeah,
it is low, especially for a game of that caliber, especially for a game that had that kind
much
of
hype?
cost. Yeah, right. And that's crazy. That it's not a lot. But then again, you look at a game. There's many studios out there who sell games for under 1 million copies, and they still stay afloat. Now, mind you, their costs are not nearly as high, but it can be done. A perfect example for me is The Darkness 2. That game was an outstanding
yeah, I
game.
love that game.
Yeah, in every aspect, that game was just a blast. And if you go look at the sales numbers right now, they sold under 300,000 copies. Now, yes, even they will admit that it was not a success, but it has not bankrupted the company, and it is not deterring them from potentially making a third game in the series. So if
But
studios
that
could
was
figure out
published
how
by
to do that,
THQ,
that was
right? Wasn't it?
published by THQ, and but it was actually created by. Now, of course, it's on the tip of my tongue here, and I can't remember the developer studio, but they're still very much alive and afloat. They're also the ones behind the abysmal failure Star Trek movie-based game. But okay, there you go. Further to the point, they released that game after the Darkness. Those are their two latest games, and they're still in business without massive layoffs.
I'm wrong, actually. Darkness 2 was by 2K.
2K
KK.
was the publisher, yeah. I can't remember who the team was, who the developer team. I can't remember off the top of my
Digital
head.
Extremes.
Digital Extremes, DE. There you go. So they're responsible for the original Darkness, the Darkness 2,
Both great games.
Star Trek. So, but the fact is they're able to still stay afloat. They're not having 90% staff layoffs.
Yeah,
because
the
of a couple
2
failures.
years that Infinite went too long is what really killed it. Because I don't know if you remember, the original trailer was way back in like 2009, I think. And then the game went away for like a year and a half. And they basically reinvented it from the ground up. So that really, really killed them.
Now, BioShock's not the first game to have this happen. I mean, even the recently released Thief that just came out last week had the same thing happen, right? And many games do, right? And they still find a way to succeed. I think that kind of layoff at Irrational is just extreme. Okay, fine, you didn't make as much money as you wanted, but the game was still a success. Now,
And
they
the
had
game-
huge expectations, but they just because they didn't meet those crazy expectations doesn't mean that they have to change their entire focus of a company.
I think I read somewhere too that Ken Levine has been, he's kind of the guy that wants to head everything. He micromanages and he puts his heart and soul into everything he does, and there's probably some aspect of burnout, and we can all probably relate to that at some point and respect it. But yeah, like having layoffs on such a massive scale after a game that does seem successful, you have to ask yourself is, are these guys uh, giving the right number? Are they really looking at the proper sales figures to justify their existence? And maybe they all are wearing glasses that are distorting kind of the reality of what these games can sell and can't. And hopefully they can. I don't want to say remanage, but I think they really need to rejig their numbers, because this whole past year we've heard a ton of studios saying games aren't successful because they didn't sell X million, but the games were critically acclaimed, like Tomb Raider from Square and Hitman, and a lot of these other, like now we're talking BioShock. So maybe these guys are a little bit. I don't know, what can we say. They're overshooting their expectations.
Everything can't be Grand Theft Auto 5.
Exactly.
Yeah, or Call of Duty.
Right.
If this is what they expect from Capcom, perfect example, Resident Evil. They expected Resident Evil 6 to sell something like 9 million copies.
That's
You're
crazy.
looking at, that's ridiculous. I don't care if the game is good or bad. I mean, not 9 million to set as just your bar for being just barely considered a success. That's basically setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, that's insane.
Sure.
But at the same
I-
time, has this been an expectation set by the industry in that consumers expect an extremely high quality product? It takes these developers a lot of money and time to make it so, and as a result, they need much higher sales to cover their costs.
If that is the case, this is which it could be, but then you start comparing something like Resident Evil 6 to Resident Evil 5, or to Resident Evil 4, or more accurately, it would be between 5 and 6 because they're both for the same generation of console. There's not a quality bump enough between the two for them to be saying, okay, now we expect Part 6 to sell twice as many. They're not doing enough. I mean, it's essentially, I'm not going to say it's the same game. They're wildly different, but they didn't do enough to explain to anybody why they should sell twice as many.
And especially with certain games like Resident Evil 6 is a perfect example. Unfortunately, the game was called Resident Evil 6. So if you hadn't played any of the other games, they probably cut off a big portion of their audience. And yeah, you can release, another version of 4. You can release, what they like an Xbox Live or PlayStation Network compilation of the previous games. But there's a lot of people who aren't going to jump on a game that's toting it's the sixth one in and stuff. And maybe that's it too. Was it mismarketed? Could be. Were their expectations too high? Definitely, right? And maybe that's something that these guys got to talk about. You can't be comparing a kind of an action RPG to even the sports genre or the Call of Duty Battlefield, where it's just online multiplayer sell millions of copies and have that many people glued to their consoles. I don't think it's a fair comparison, and I don't think they should be expecting the numbers that they're trying to get.
Well, I think what happened at the end of this last generation, the attach rates were so low at that point, but they were thinking that they were going to sell huge amounts because of how many consoles were out in the wild, but they didn't realize how many people had kind of stopped playing those consoles. So, I mean, there's a lot of games that came out last year that I know people who just didn't even play them. So the casual market was kind of done with those systems at that point.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially once it started showing off what the next gen can do.
Exactly.
People started saying, "Well, why should I buy anything now? I can save my money and wait." Not everyone had the money to just go ahead and buy the consoles on launch. They needed to. People need time. $500 is a lot of money. They need time to
Exactly.
save up. So spending $60 here, $60 there on a new game, that really eats into your budget if you're on a budget. So, I don't think they thought about that too well. I don't
The
think they really
publishers
thought
did.
ahead. No, the publishers didn't. Their expectations were ridiculous. I just don't see it. Why they would think that. And I, Scott, do you think that has some kind of a negative effect on what we're going to expect to start seeing coming forward? Is this going to make publishers force developers to be a little bit more reserved, to hold back on trying to be innovative? Perfect example would be Titanfall. We all heard about how Infinity Ward and then the separation, now Respawn, how they wanted to do something different, and of course Activision says, well, no, why would we let you? I mean, Call of Duty sells too well. We don't want to try something different. What if you fail? How do you think this is going to play? How do you think it's going to affect what we could expect to see? Grand Theft Auto 6, is it just going to be Grand Theft Auto 5 with better graphics? Do you think they're going to try for anything, or are they going to be too afraid now that everyone has these ridiculous expectations for sales? Scott, what do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting because this actually circles back nicely to what Cliffy B had originally said, in that he is completely done with disc-based games, and he said more people need to embrace the Minecraft and DayZ model, where you just get the game out there, develop it as you go, and have people pick it up and learn it for themselves. They put YouTube videos out, and the game markets itself. They teach themselves, and they get to be more interactive as they develop it. It keeps the costs like much more manageable, that you can develop as you go. You have income coming in, not all at the very end, but as you develop the game. Now, unfortunately, this isn't really an option for consoles because most of it comes through physical media. But now that, like, especially Xbox One, where a lot of it's gone digital, there's digital codes and a lot of just online purchases, I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being some kind of console norm where development happens as you go. I don't know the Xbox policies with regards to what can be released. It has to be a finished product or not. But Steam definitely has it nailed where users can pay for an early access and just get the updates as they come. But it'd be interesting if consoles were to adapt the same policy.
I think you're gonna see more episodic stuff, like The Walking Dead,
I
because that helps them.
I do think that that's going to be a huge leap forward. I think Telltale Games really, I wouldn't say set a bar, but
They were
kinda
ahead of the
taught-
curve.
They were ahead of the curve, and they proved that it worked. So and now they're having that happen with work with their The Walking Dead. Now they have Game of Thrones coming out. They have the Fables. They just did another one, and they said they want to do Bond, which I think would be
They're
really
doing
cool.
the Borderlands 2, but it's Tales from Borderland.
Right, yeah. So they're all of a sudden they've gone from, a company that released, I guess mildly successful indie
Back to the
games.
Future.
Back to the Future, Jurassic Park, and now
Jurassic Park was really bad.
Yeah, I didn't play that one. Luckily, it just did not look too great to me. But
That was bad.
Walking Dead season 1 wins Game of the Year from many different reputable places, and you kind of look at that, and now look what they're doing. They have 5-6 brand new massive licenses under their belt, and they're all of which are going to follow that episodic content. Now that works for a game like a game style that Telltale Games does. Would that work for Call of Duty or Battlefield or Gears of War or Halo?
I don't see how that style of publishing works for any other type of game other than the story driven point and click Minecraft create things as you go. Like I read that article from Cliffy B, and I don't know, maybe I'm too stuck in my ways of getting a game on a disc and having the full game ready and get DLC if you want. But I don't see how, basically, to me, it sounds like they're selling you a beta. And they're like, come and play this game and play it, and we'll fix it as you go, and we'll give you new stuff as you go. I don't buy it. I don't know if we're gonna get the caliber of games that we've had and come to, I would say, know and love and expect. Like I think there's a place for the Telltale Games. I think there's a place for smaller indie type games, but I don't know, especially as we're talking mostly consoles. I don't know if I would be down with playing a game for a couple of days and then say, oh well, I gotta wait for the next iteration of it, as opposed to saying, yeah, hey, I've got the next Fallout or the next Gears or whatever, and it takes me a week or 2 weeks straight to play through. I don't see that as a viable future. I think it's got a place, but I don't think it's the future. I don't think it's the answer. That might be the easy button for these guys. Smaller studios, get people to advertise for you, use Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, but yeah, I don't know. I think that
smaller gameplay or smaller studios will benefit from that kind of stuff. But the big guys, like your Rockstars or your Naughty Dogs or those guys, people have expectations that are too high, and like those guys always find a way to be innovative no matter what. Doesn't matter how many they sell or whatever, they always find a way to innovate games. Like it would have been very easy for Grand Theft Auto 5 to be Grand Theft Auto 4, just better looking. But they tried that whole new dynamic with the 3 players, and they gave you an online, and they took 5 years to do it. But like the thing is, game studios of that size are going to become more and more rare because when it misses, it's bad.
And that's true. There's been a few failures in our time, and that never goes well for the companies. Um, and I think that on a final note here, games that try and evolve. Now that you brought that up, Blackjack, perfect example of that would be the new Batman, the Arkham Knight that they just advertised. You're going to be able to. They're adding in the Batmobile. I mean, it seems like the logical,
Yeah,
common
it seems
sense next
finally.
step. But exactly, finally they're doing this. But the fact is, they are, and they didn't before,
Well,
and now they
hopefully
are.
they get rid of all the citizens so Batman's not running them over in the Batmobile.
But why not pick them up, bring them in your car a little bit, drive them to a park, kill them, take their money? That's
Grand
how do
Theft Auto Batman.
Bruce Wayne got rich somehow. Come on.
that trailer is amazing, even though there's no gameplay. It looks
I
amazing.
know. I know. It's such a good trailer, and that I always find trailers like that kind of funny because they really they don't tell you anything about the game.
Nothing.
Nothing. They showed you
But
the
they get
Batmobile.
you
You can drive.
excited about
And
it.
nobody cares.
Exactly. They get we're all talking about it right now. And it worked. That just proves right there that it works. Well, on that note, everyone, I think we're out of time, and I think that does anyone else have anything else they want to add before I cut it all off? Scott?
I was just gonna say, check out the website gamingv2.com. You can follow me on Twitter at BlackJackerZack.
Do you want to
And
spell
make
that for them?
BLACKJACKRAZAK.
Perfect, perfect. Andre, you got anything else you want to add to this topic? Anything about the AAA and what's going on, and whether you think that they're going down the right path or down to the dark side?
I think one of the things we didn't really touch on is that maybe it's not such a bad thing to thin the herd of the AAA studios, because what if the AAA just literally became, a dozen studios putting out, maybe we only get 6 blockbusters a year instead of trying to get out 24 like we've been having in the last little while. Maybe these studios will grind down, and every AAA studio will make a game that is of the caliber of kind of that Grand Theft Auto, instead of having a whole bunch of little games trying to meet that. So maybe the the market space will change, and we'll have a lot of kind of like indie or smaller project games that are still done really well. But then we'll have there's only going to be 6 or a dozen A-listers, and it was like that before on the
old
PlayStation
consoles?
2, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 1, like the Sega consoles.
Yeah,
Well,
but people are
Nintendo,
complaining right now
you,
that they have nothing to play.
no, but what I'm saying, but they have nothing to play. But if we look at the old, like the last year on PlayStation 3 and Xbox, there was 2 or 3 what you'd consider AAA titles coming out per month. It was almost too much, and maybe that's why they couldn't sell what they wanted. But again, maybe if there's less of them, so evolution, survival of the fittest, right? I don't know.
I agree, and hey, at least this way, if they only give us 6 to 12 a year, at least we'll actually have time to play them and beat them before getting overwhelmed.
or you keep playing it. Like what if Titanfall is that next game that is just like, wow, I can play just Titanfall. I don't have to play Call of Duty, Battlefield, whatever other kind of shooters come out. Like there's about Medal of Honor, and there's like how many shooters can survive, or can they can't all sell.
Exactly.
Right?
You only have so much time on the weekend to play your games.
Exactly, right?
Scott, did you have anything you want to add?
Well, I just added on to that. At the same time, like if they only release 6 to 12 games a year and they were all phenomenal, I'm on board 100%. However, when there's less competition, there's less requirement for innovation, and they'll stick to the formula.
That is a good point. No one can argue that, but at the same time, less competition at least could help some of these other studios sell their copies because they're not competing against 12 different people in a 3-week span of time.
True.
And it can help the little guy to come on the in-between times, knowing that, hey, there's a good 40 to 50 days where there's not a AAA that I have to worry about.
Exactly.
Right?
Or it helps those guys because they're not only going to be 6 or 12 games. It just could be that the other games could have like that different focus. Or like, yeah, we're not going for the Call of Duty crowd. We're going for the, I don't know, like, I don't want to say it, like the Angry Birds crowd or whatever. They're just things that don't have to come out at that $60 price point and really be a game that people are going to talk about and play for 3, 4, 5 months, right? So
Oh, that's true. That's true. Okay, well, that's all the time that we have for today. And I'd like to thank everyone who made it this far for listening. And please check out our website, gamingv2.com. We have these podcasts, previous podcasts, articles, reviews, you name it. You can hear more of our lovely voices. Thank you again, Scott, as always, Blackjack, Andre.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, and have a good night.
Goodbye.
Good night, guys.